He thought walking away from her pain would set him free, but fate had a cruel way of bringing him back to the same bed with the same sickness. What happens when the person you promised to love forever becomes a burden you can no longer carry? David pressed his ear against the bedroom door, listening to the sounds that had become his nightmare. His wife, Emma's violent coughing that shook the walls of their small house like thunder before his storm. 3 months ago, she had been the most beautiful woman in their village, her laughter ringing through their home like sweet music. Now she lay wasting away, her once glowing skin pale as moonlight, her body growing thinner each day. "David," Emma's weak voice called from inside the room. "Can you bring me some water?" His jaw clenched. The neighbors were watching from their windows again, whispering about the cursed house where sickness lived. His friends had stopped visiting. Even the village children ran past their home without stopping to play. David walked to the kitchen, his bare feet slapping against the cold concrete floor. The smell of medicine and sickness hung in the air like a heavy cloud that never lifted. He filled a clay cup with water, his hands trembling slightly. When had his life become this? When had love become such a heavy stone to carry? As he entered the bedroom, the stench hit him like a slap. Emma tried to smile, but her lips were cracked and dry. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of her labored breathing. "The medicine from the clinic is not working." Emma set down the cup with shaking hands. Maybe we should try the traditional healer again." David's stomach twisted. More money, more failed treatments, more days watching his wife disappear before his eyes, while his own life slipped away with hers. "We will see," he muttered, already knowing he had no more money to spend on false hopes. That night, as Emma slept fitfully beside him, David stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was how love was supposed to feel, like drowning in an ocean with no shore in sight. 2 weeks later, David was at the village market, buying the little food he could afford, when he saw her. Grace moved through the crowd like sunlight breaking through dark clouds, her yellow dress bright against the dusty ground, her skin glowing with the health that his wife had lost. She was new to the village, selling vegetables from a colorful stall that drew customers like bees to honey. "You look tired, brother," she said when he approached her stall, her voice warm and caring. "Are you eating well?" David's throat went dry. When was the last time someone had looked at him with concern instead of pity? When was the last time a woman had called him brother instead of whispering about his cursed household? "My wife she's been sick," he found himself saying, the words tumbling out like water from a broken pot. Grace's eyes filled with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that. It must be very difficult for you." She selected the best tomatoes from her store and placed them in his basket. "These are free. You need to take care of yourself too." As David walked home, Grace's words echoed in his mind. "You need to take care of yourself too." When had anyone last thought about his needs, his struggles, his pain? The next day, he found an excuse to return to the market, and the next. Grace always had a kind word, a warm smile, a gentle touch on his arm that sent electricity through his body. She listened when he talked about his fears, his exhaustion, his loneliness. She made him remember what it felt like to be seen as a man instead of just a caregiver. "You are a good man, David," Grace said one afternoon as storm clouds gathered overhead. "Not many men will sacrifice so much for their wives. But you are sacrificing your own life. That's not healthy." David felt something crack inside his chest. "What am I supposed to do? Leave her?" Grace touched his hand softly. "I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you deserve happiness too. You deserve to live." That night, David couldn't sleep. Emma's coughing seemed louder, more desperate. The smell of sickness seemed stronger. The walls of their home felt like a prison closing in on him. And in his mind, Grace's words played like a sweet song. You deserve happiness too. You deserve to live. But could he really abandon the woman who had promised to love him forever? Could he walk away from the sacred vows they had made under the ancient baobab tree? What would you do if your heart was torn between duty and desire? Stay tuned to find out what choice David makes and whether he will regret it forever. The moment when a man's character is truly revealed is not when life is easy, but when life becomes unbearably difficult. 3 months passed, and Emma's condition worsened. The traditional healer had shaken his head gravely, muttering about spirits and curses that were beyond his power to heal. The clinic doctor spoke in medical terms that meant nothing, but painted a picture of slow, inevitable decline. David found himself spending longer hours at the market, not buying, but talking to Grace. She had become his escape, his breath of fresh air in a life that felt like suffocation. When he was with her, he could laugh again. He could dream again. He could remember what it felt like to be alive. She's getting worse, David confided to Grace one evening as the sun painted the sky orange and red. They sat under a mango tree, hidden from the judgmental eyes of the village. Grace moved closer, her hand finding his. David, you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Maybe this is God's way of telling you it's time to let go. Let go? The words felt foreign on his tongue. You could start over with someone who could make you happy. Someone who could give you the children you've always wanted, the life you've always dreamed of. Her eyes met his, and David saw his future reflected there, a future full of light and laughter and hope. That night, David sat beside Emma's bed, watching her sleep. Her breathing was shallow, her face gaunt. The woman he had married seemed to have disappeared, leaving behind only this fragile shell that required all his strength to maintain. Emma's eyes fluttered open. David, are you okay? You look different. David's heart hammered against his ribs. I'm fine, just tired. Emma struggled to sit up, her movements painful to watch. David, I know this is hard for you. If you want to find someone else, someone who can give you what I can't anymore, I would understand. The words hit David like lightning. Had she seen through him? Did she know about Grace? Don't say that, he whispered, but the words felt hollow. I love you enough to let you go, Emma continued, tears streaming down her thin cheeks. You've already given me more than any woman could ask for. You've stayed when others would have run. But David barely heard her words. All he could think about was Grace's warm smile, her healthy body, her promises of a new beginning. All he could feel was the weight of this sickness, this endless responsibility, this slow death of everything he had once been. The next morning, David made his choice. He packed his few belongings while Emma slept, his hands shaking with a mixture of fear and anticipation. He left most of their money on the kitchen table, not all, but enough for Emma to survive for a few months. He told himself it was generous. He told himself it was fair. He wrote a letter with trembling hands. Emma, I cannot do this anymore. You said you would understand. I pray that you do. I pray that God forgives us both. As David walked out of the house that had been their home for 5 years, he didn't look back. He couldn't bear to see Emma's face when she woke up and found his letter. He couldn't bear to witness the moment when her heart would break into pieces that could never be put back together. But what David didn't know was that this choice would follow him like a shadow, and that life has a way of teaching us lessons we never wanted to learn.
Sometimes, when we think we've escaped our problems, we've only traded them for bigger ones that haven't shown themselves yet. Grace welcomed David into her small but cheerful house with arms wide open and a smell that made him forget every moment of pain from the past year. Her home smelled of fresh flowers and cooking spices, life and joy instead of medicine and death. The walls were painted bright yellow, and sunlight streamed through clean windows, making everything glow like a dream come true. "You made the right choice," Grace whispered as she held him close that first night. "You deserve to be happy, David. You deserve to live." For the first time in months, David slept through the night without being woken by coughing, without jumping up to check on someone who needed him, without the weight of responsibility crushing his chest. He woke up to the sound of Grace humming as she prepared breakfast, and he thought this must be what peace felt like. The village gossips had plenty to say, of course. They whispered behind market stalls and after church services about the man who had abandoned his dying wife for a younger, healthier woman. Some called him heartless. Others said they understood. But David had learned to close his ears to their judgments. What did they know about the hell he had lived through? What did they know about watching the person you love disappear piece by piece while you slowly died inside? Grace defended him fiercely. David is a good man who suffered more than any human should have to suffer. She would tell anyone who questioned their relationship. He gave that woman everything he had until there was nothing left to give. Now it's his turn to be happy. And happy he was. Grace cooked his favorite meals with ingredients he could taste again. She laughed at his jokes and made him feel clever and interesting. She talked about their future together, the children they would have, the business they would start, the life they would build from the ashes of his old one. 6 months passed like a beautiful dream. David's body filled out as he ate well again. His smile returned. His laughter echoed through Grace's house like music he had forgotten how to make. When people saw them together at the market or walking hand in hand through the village, they saw a man reborn. "I want to marry you," David said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Grace's eyes sparkled with joy. "But nothing would make me happier. But first, we should wait a little longer. Let people forget about the past. Let them see that we are serious, that this is not just some temporary madness." David agreed, though part of him wanted to shout his love from every rooftop. He wanted the whole world to know that David the widower was dead and David the lover was alive again. But sometimes when he walked through the village, he would catch glimpses of Emma's old friends, and something cold would touch his heart like a ghost's finger. They would look at him with eyes full of something he couldn't quite name. Not anger, not hatred, but something deeper and more disturbing. Something that looked almost like pity. "How is she?" he asked Emma's friend Sarah one day, the words escaping before he could stop them. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. "She's still alive, if that's what you're asking. Barely. But she's different now. Quiet. Like something inside her died along with her hope." David pushed the image away. Emma had told him she would understand. She had practically given him permission to leave. He had done what was best for both of them. He had chosen life over slow death, love over duty, happiness over misery. So why did Sarah's words feel like stones in his stomach? And why did he have this strange feeling that his new paradise was built on ground that might not be as solid as it seemed?
They say what goes around comes around, but they never tell you how fast it travels or how hard it hits when it finally finds you. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning, 18 months after David had walked away from his old life. He woke up with what felt like a simple headache, nothing more than the normal aches that come with hard work and getting older. Grace made him tea with honey and told him to rest. her hands cool and comforting on his forehead. "It's probably just stress from the new business," she said, referring to the small shop they had opened together, selling household goods. "You've been working too hard lately." But the headache didn't go away. By evening, it had grown into something that felt like hammers pounding inside his skull. David tried to eat the delicious dinner Grace had prepared, but everything tasted like ash in his mouth. His stomach churned with nausea that came in waves like a storm-tossed sea. "Maybe you should see the clinic doctor," Grace suggested, though David could hear something new in her voice, a tiny note of worry that hadn't been there before. The doctor examined David with the same detached professionalism he had shown Emma years before. He pressed cold instruments against David's chest, looked into his eyes with bright lights, asked questions that David answered through gritted teeth as his head pounded with increasing intensity. "I want to run some tests," the doctor said finally, his face revealing nothing. "Come back tomorrow." That night, David lay awake listening to the same sounds he had once tried to escape. Labored breathing, restless tossing, the small moans that come when the body fights against something it cannot defeat. Except now, these sounds were coming from his own throat. Grace brought him water and medicine, her touch gentle but somehow different. David caught her staring at him when she thought he wasn't looking, and in her eyes, he saw something that made his blood run cold, the same expression he used to see in the mirror when he looked at Emma. Fear, exhaustion, the dawning realization that the person you love might be slipping away from you. The test results came back a week later, and the doctor's words fell on David's ears like death sentences spoken in a foreign language he somehow understood perfectly. The same disease that had taken Emma was now growing inside him, spreading through his body like fire through dry grass. "How long do I have?" David asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "It's hard to say. Maybe a year, maybe less. We will do what we can to make you comfortable, but..." The doctor's voice faded into background noise as David's mind reeled with the terrible irony of it all. The disease he had run from had followed him home like a faithful dog. The cause he thought he had escaped had been waiting for him all along, patient as a hunter in the forest. Grace was quiet during the drive home, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. When they reached the house, she helped David to bed with the same careful movements he had once used with Emma. But David could see the fear in her eyes, could smell the change in her scent, the way people smell different when they are calculating whether they should stay or run. "We'll fight this together," Grace said, but her voice lacked the conviction it once carried. "We will find the best doctors, try every treatment available." David nodded, but he was thinking about Emma, lying in their old bed, her body wasting away while he counted the cost of her medicine and dreamed of escape. He was thinking about how love feels different when it becomes a burden instead of a gift. He was thinking about how easy it is to make promises when you are healthy and how much harder it becomes when those promises require sacrifice. That night, as Grace lay beside him pretending to sleep, David wondered if she was thinking the same thoughts he had once thought. Was she calculating how long she could afford to stay? Was she remembering what it felt like to be free, to be desired, to have a future that stretched ahead of her instead of a present that felt like a trap? And for the first time since he had left Emma, David began to understand that some debts can never be paid and some lessons come with a price that make you wish you had never learned them at all. But David's real education was just beginning, and the next chapter would teach him something about love, loyalty, and justice that he would never forget. The cruelest teacher in life is often our own reflection, showing us exactly what we've become when we thought we were becoming something better. 3 months into David's illness, the changes in Grace were impossible to ignore. She still brought him food and medicine, still helped him to the bathroom when his legs became too weak to carry him, still slept beside him at night. But her touch had become mechanical, her smiles forced, her eyes distant, as if she were looking at something far beyond him. David recognized all the signs because he had lived through them before on the other side. The way Grace now took longer trips to the market, staying away for hours when she used to rush home to be with him. The way she had stopped talking about their future together and instead spoke only about day-to-day necessities. The way she flinched slightly when he reached for her hand, as if his touch had become something she had to endure rather than something she craved. "I met someone today who knew your wife," Grace said one evening as she fed him soup with a spoon, her voice carefully neutral. "Sarah, I think her name was." David's stomach clenched. "And not from the illness. What did she say?" "She said Emma died 6 months ago, alone. She said Emma kept asking for you until the very end, kept hoping that you would come back." The words hit David like physical blows, each one finding a target in his chest where guilt had been growing like a tumor alongside his disease. Emma dead. Emma, who loves him enough to let him go, had died alone while he was building his new paradise with Grace. Emma, who had never stopped hoping for his return, had breathed her last breath without the comfort of his presence. "I didn't know," David whispered, though the words felt inadequate, meaningless. "Sarah said something else," Grace continued, her voice now carrying a strange tone that David couldn't quite identify. "She said Emma forgave you, even at the end, even when she was dying alone. She said she understood why you left and that she didn't blame you." Grace set down the spoon and looked directly at David for the first time in weeks. "She loved you enough to die without hatred in her heart. Tell me, David, if I were to get sick like Emma did, like you are now, would you love me enough to stay? Or would you find another young, healthy woman to build a new paradise with?" The question hung in the air between them like a sword waiting to fall. David opened his mouth to speak, to swear that he would never abandon Grace the way he had abandoned Emma, but the words died in his throat. Because he knew, with the terrible clarity that comes only when we are forced to see ourselves without the merciful filters of self-deception, that he could not promise what Grace was asking for. He had already proven what kind of man he was when love became inconvenient. He had already shown that his promises were only good when keeping them was easy. Grace saw the truth in his silence. She nodded slowly, as if she had been expecting this answer all along. "I've been offered a job in the city," she said quietly. "Good pay, good prospects, a chance to start over somewhere new with someone who..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. "With someone healthy, with someone who could give her the future she deserved instead of the slow death she would have to watch if she stayed." David wanted to beg her not to leave, to promise that he would be different, that he would be the man Emma had deserved and Grace needed him to be. But the words wouldn't come because he knew they would be lies. He had learned too late that love is not just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day, especially on the days when making that choice cost you everything you thought you wanted. Grace left the next morning while David was sleeping, taking only her clothes and leaving behind a note that echoed the one he had written to Emma. "I'm sorry. I thought I was stronger than this. I pray that you understand." David read the note with hands that shook from both illness and recognition. He was alone now, just as Emma had been alone. The disease was spreading through his body just as it had spread through hers. The friends who had celebrated his new beginning were now avoiding his calls, just as people had once avoided his house when Emma was dying. But perhaps most painful of all was the understanding that came with this solitude, the recognition that Emma faced her death with a grace and forgiveness that he could never match. She had loved him enough to let him go and still forgive him for going. She had found a strength in her dying that he was now beginning to comprehend in his own. As David lay in the bed where he once found paradise, surrounded by the silence that Grace had left behind, he finally understood the true lesson of his story. Love is not about finding someone who makes you happy. Love is about being someone who chooses to stay when staying becomes the hardest thing in the world. Emma had learned this lesson and died with dignity. Grace had never had to learn it and left while she still could. And David would face his final months knowing that when life had tested his character, he had failed completely, not once but twice. But perhaps, in recognizing his failure, he had finally learned what love actually means. Perhaps understanding comes too late for some of us, but it still comes. And maybe, just maybe, that understanding is worth something after all. The question this story leaves us with is simple but profound. What kind of person will you choose to be when love becomes difficult? Will you be like David, who ran when life got hard? Or will you be like Emma, who loved so completely that she could forgive even being abandoned? If this story touched your heart and made you think about the true meaning of love and commitment, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to our channel for more African folk tales that teach life's most important lessons. Because sometimes the stories our ancestors told contain the wisdom we need to live better lives today. Let us know in the comments, how do you think this story would have been different if David had chosen to stay with Emma? What would real love have looked like in that situation? Remember, the stories we tell shape the people we become. Choose your story wisely.